For those of you that don't know me, I'm Jody Joyner. I've been a member here at UBC since 2016 when my partner Kelby and I joined. First, let me say how appreciative I am to be in a space where we can be enriched by a diverse set of voices, especially those that we've already heard during the series. Hans, Katie, Rowena, Connor, and Lance, thank you all for sharing your queer faith stories. And thanks to Pastor Natalie for initiating this whole series. My faith story really runs in parallel with my church life. My story begins in Killeen, my hometown, where going to church was central to my upbringing as the youngest of four born into a military family. Sunday school, worship services, vacation Bible school, Easter sunrise services, revival meetings, even Lottie Moon and Annie Armstrong offerings, they all were staples of my church life during my formative years. Let's just say it was a very Southern Baptist church life. All of it, the good and the not so good, it shaped and it molded me. It was a springboard for my walk with God and ultimately led to my salvation experience as a junior in high school during a revival at my church. I knew then and there on that day and that moment that God accepted me into his kingdom, that I was eternally secure. But not too much later, I felt that I simultaneously fit in everywhere and nowhere all at the same time. There was something, a bit different about me. In those days, homosexuality wasn't really discussed in my circles, and there were no role models around me for what it looked like to be gay, and certainly not within a church context. My home church was a kaleidoscope of sorts with an array of racial and ethnic diversity, multi-generational involvement, but being gay and Christian was something for which I didn't see modeled. And sexuality was a bit of a taboo subject then, and I guess honestly it probably is to some extent in many church spaces today. Buried within my subconscious to some degree was a question of the depth of God's love. Did he love all of me, including this part? Frankly, this question was kind of put on pause for a while I focused on other pursuits, namely going to school across the street. That pause lasted until just after completing my undergrad studies, when I met my first boyfriend, a long-term partner. Suddenly, I was forced to begin to deal with my sexuality as it related to my faith. The question cropped up again, did God love this part of me? As a member of a fairly large, conservative Southern Baptist church, it was what I was familiar with and what I knew at the time, on the northeast side of town, as a young adult, I mostly embraced what I was taught then, and it added another layer onto my faith foundation. However, in that particular church, it was made abundantly clear from the pulpit and otherwise that I couldn't be entirely me. It was here that I learned that there's a huge chasm between tolerance and welcome. This tension presented a tug of war of sorts for me. And I suspect that we've all wavered a bit in our faith at times, at some point in our walk with God. But more so for me, my hope was damaged. It, to some extent, was lost. And there's a subtle difference between faith and hope. They're not quite the same thing. Faith relates to our belief and trust in what God can do. Hope is that optimistic attitude where we have an expectation of what God will do in our lives. For me, my faith was solid, but I was losing my hope. I didn't have an expectation that tomorrow was going to be better than yesterday in this aspect of my life. So I embarked on a journey to find myself and to further understand my relationship with God. During that time, I often found myself being drawn to Romans 8:35 to 39, where I finally understood that there's nothing that would separate God's love from me through his Son. That scripture resonated with me internally to indicate that the scope of God's love was limitless, unconditional, and applied to all of me, who he made me to be. After a long, closeted tenure with this particular church and with the dawn of a new relationship with Kelby, I sensed that God was calling me and us to find a new church home. During that search, a friend of mine, Bradley Pounds, recommended me to his church home, a small, progressive, welcoming, and affirming Baptist church, UBC. At the time, I didn't know a church like this even existed, quite frankly. It wasn't even on my radar. And I quickly learned that this wasn't a traditional Baptist church, and have since learned, being here at UBC for the last 8 years, it's offered me a feeling of belonging, of liberation, and at long last, hope of a true church home. For the first time in my church life, I've been able to have my whole authentic self be accepted within a church body. And for that, I'm extremely grateful and hopeful for what the future holds. So to anyone struggling to reconcile their faith with their identity, know that you are not alone. There's a place for you in both your faith and the broader community. Seek out those who will support and uplift you. And remember, as Romans 5 says, glory in those tribulations as they ultimately produce a hope that does not disappoint. Thank you.